get lambs to take a bottle, in particular if they're used to yo's milk, and in that situation stomach tubing them, particularly before the night comes, so last job and the thing is go around in the evening before we head back into the house is to go and check all the lambs, and any lambs that are under a little bit of pressure, maybe give them a top up.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now, with the current cold snap, we have a bonus episode this week as I'm joined by my colleagues Damian, Costello and Michael Gottstein. Damian's going to discuss some of the challenges such as managing water supply and handling livestock at the moment, emphasising the importance of safety during this difficult period, highlighting some key considerations for farmers. Michael discusses the impact on livestock, providing guidance on managing hypothermic lambs and the importance of supplementing feed during this period. He concludes by encouraging farmers to check in on their neighbours and reach out for assistance where needed. Damian, the current cold snap, it's thrown up a lot of different headaches for transport, for getting to places, and it's a lot of extra workload on anyone feeding stock in yards or outdoors at the moment.
Absolutely, Kieran. I suppose for people that have sheep indoors, maybe water is one of the big issues with frozen pipes, and that I suppose for ewes, we'll say that will be March lambing ewes. Maybe they're only on silage. They're not on concentrates at the minute. If you have wetter silage, they're probably water maybe not as critical for them. But important to check that the water is running and trying to get it going every day. If they're maybe earlier lambing ewes that are on concentrates, or even ewes that are on drier forage such as hay, certainly water will be critical to them. You have other situations maybe where people are finishing lambs indoors, and again they're probably on a high level of concentrates, and again water, having water going is really critical for them. And as you rightly say, it's adding hugely to the workload, and people using blow torches and whatever to free up pipes. But it is important in situations, I suppose, for either ewes or finishing lambs where they're on drier feed or where they're on intensive finishing diets, that water must be available to them at all times. And you can free it out, but it can freeze again during the day or during the night. I suppose the other thing, people that have stock out, it's important to check their water supply as well, and maybe break the ice on the drinker daily as well to make sure that they have access. They may not drink a lot. They certainly probably won't drink as much as sheep that are indoors, but important that you break the ice on the surface of the water to give them access to it.
Your two big concerns, particularly in that indoor scenario, is going to affect intake, so it is, but you could also see some metabolic conditions, both in the ewes and particularly in that intensive finishing lamb situation.
Absolutely, yeah. It will severely depress intake, and you can get, that obviously in finishing lambs you don't want to be stalling them either, in terms of thrive and that. So it is really critical,
Risk of calculating and other things. Look, when we're talking about water, I know it seems very practical, but the next headache's going to be both water pipes and stuff like that. Straw bedded sheds, all them kind of things, it causes issues. I suppose knowing where you can isolate those and trying to minimise the amount of damage done is key.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, exactly, and there can be damage done at times in freeing up water pipes. But look at. I suppose the key thing is to, as you said there, you can have issues with ball cocks getting stuck or something like that, where you free it out and then it won't stop. So, look, the key thing is to keep an eye on it, and as you say, being in a position maybe to turn off water and get it sorted is important, because the last thing you want is a flooded shed as well,
You never have too many supplies on hand either at times like this. Look, we're talking about freeing up things. Look, there's labour involved. Providing that extra water is troublesome. Damian, just from the point of view of even working around that yard at the moment, there are a couple of things we also need to consider there.
Yeah, look at as we all know, I suppose untreated surfaces can be particularly risky at this time of the year. So lots of people are scanning around now, March lambing flocks in particular. So for both yourself, I suppose, and your scanner and the animals, turning them into icy yards is not ideal. And it's something to be cognizant of, I suppose. It's probably maybe if there are alternatives, as in scanning them inside in the shed, or less slippy surfaces. But just something to be aware of. Sometimes a few bags of salt in an area, if you have to be letting a group of ewes out of a shed, that they're not in danger, or yourself are not in danger of falling on a slippy surface. So putting down that there are, most hardware and co-ops have salt available for this purpose, and a few bags of that can be a really good investment, I suppose.
And look, in some places, obviously, it's not going to be feasible to get there at the moment. Like delaying it a couple of days at this stage is neither here nor there.
It's not going to be. Yeah, look, it's not going to make a bit of difference, and it's you're right. I mean, it is probably going to slow up scanners, from just purely from an accessibility point of view. Like, but again, look at in an ideal scenario, you're talking about scanning between 80 to 90 days into pregnancy, but a few days in general isn't going to make a massive difference. And again, safety, I suppose, is first and foremost in all situations, really.
Yeah, and look, when you're talking about that, I suppose we have to be conscious. Like, it's more difficult in certain areas at the moment, obviously, but safety has to come into it in terms of your own personal safety too, where you're going, where you're working. A lot of farming's on its own, Damian. Like, it's important to take some precautions there as well.
For sure. Like, as I mentioned earlier there, I mean, the few bags of salt around the yard, even sort of, there's obviously, the danger of trips and falls, and somebody, the likes of fracturing a bone or a head injury or something like that. So, like, clearing a few tracks around the farmyard, and using your de-ice and salt to keep these walkways relatively safe. I suppose, again, getting up and down off a tractor or something like that is a time to be particularly cautious with your footing. Particularly watching, we'll say, sloped areas in yards, or areas maybe where water runs, that they can be. Again, I suppose trying to get your work done during daylight hours. I know there's lots of part-time farmers out there, particularly for outwintered stock. That you can get to see them during daylight hours where possible, or get somebody to have a look with them. Avoiding obviously kind of rough areas if you can. Again, as always, I suppose, but in particular in these type of conditions, important that somebody knows where you're going, or somebody knows where you are, and having your mobile phone charged and on you, so that if you do get into difficulty, if you happen to fall over, and that you can contact somebody to alert them, like, and get help for yourself. So, look, it's a bit of common sense, I suppose, but it's no harm to say it at the same time,
You have to be practical. So the thing with the phone, team, and we're all guilty of it, to not leave it in the Jeep or sitting on the tractor, have it on you.
For sure, yeah. Have it in your pocket, or have it on your person, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Look, that's one side of the headaches this causes from an animal point of view, I suppose, Michael. Cold weather, risk of hypothermia, more challenging for ewes. It's not easy at the moment for those that are lambing with young lambs, either in sheds or outdoors.
Yeah, look at Kieran. I suppose this type of weather is always challenging. I suppose whether you're lambing indoors or outdoors. If you're lambing indoors, the challenge is probably a little bit less in terms of that the animals aren't exposed to the elements. But I suppose you have got the challenge of frozen water and all that stuff then that Damian was talking about. Snow blowing into sheds and things like that. So look at, I suppose the big things really in terms of. I suppose first of all is to try and maximize the nutrition that we have for the ewes, and to make sure that they're milking well and all that type of stuff. And hopefully ewes are in reasonably good condition. But I suppose when things go wrong, and generally you will always have a few problem cases. And we've got lambs that are small or weak or not sucking properly, or ewes with the individual ewes that didn't have enough milk or something like that. So providing the lambs with alternatives, I suppose, just keeping an eye on when you see weak lambs or lambs that didn't get a good suck to intervene and bottle them. And sometimes it can be hard to get lambs to take a bottle, in particular if they're used to ewes milk, and in that situation stomach tubing them, particularly before the night comes, so last job and the thing is go around in the evening before we head back into the house is to go and check all the lambs, and any lambs that are under a little bit of pressure, maybe give them a top up. So really important there, I suppose, is to have equipment there to do that. So stomach tubes and bottle feed and artificial colostrum and artificial milk replacer, to be able to do that, and a way of heating up the water. So at a minimum, every shed should have a kettle inside it, ideally an under sink heater, to supply warm water. Red lambs, I suppose, ewes with triplets or quads where there's a number of small lambs after lambing down, and there's we're getting temperatures there up to -8 in sheds at the moment, forecasted at the moment, and I suppose it'll be a little bit warmer in the shed, but for small weak lambs, I suppose those type of temperatures are enough to do them in overnight. So providing heat lamps for weak lambs or lambs that you feel are going to be under pressure in the kind of current temperature. So heat lamps are very important. With the heat lamps, is first of all that we keep the leads out of the reach of stock so that they can't chew them and get electrocuted on them, that we have proper sockets and fittings, because electricity is dangerous in if it gets if there's incorrect wiring or not proper external sockets. And really, really important is that we separate the heat lamp from the ewe in such a way that very often a ewe with newborn lambs can take it out on the lamp, break the lamp, the hot bulb falls on the straw, and next thing we've got a fire, the whole shed gone up on fire. So really important that we don't just hang a heat lamp in an individual lambing pen with a ewe and just leave it dangling there. There needs to be some sort of a frame or guard put around it. The little guard that is on the lamp isn't going to be good enough if the ewe decides to have at it. She's going to dismantle that in a couple of minutes. So, or a pallet or something like that, or another lambing hurdle or something, just to separate the ewe from that particular lamp, and prevent that situation from arising.
To be fair, Michael, that's very important, especially in conditions like this that we have where temporary measures can be set up. Maybe even in the case, Michael, where it's a young lamb and just needs a bit of warming up, if it had to be removed for a short time and put back in again, or into a heating box and back in again, as opposed to taking that risk.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, same story. Where I am down south here now in Cork, there's a lot of places closed, a lot of places inaccessible. Having those supplies, have spare bulbs, all those type of things, for when the weather is coming, and try to have them in stock.
Michael, like you mentioned there about the weak lambs, one of the common things we're going to see in this weather, especially maybe first thing in the morning, your lamb during the night we come out, or even that lamb that was born earlier maybe hasn't sucked enough. That lamb that goes down on us at the moment, where the cold has got to him, has enough in his belly. How do we deal with that lamb that's in that situation, that is on the way out if we don't intervene, and what kind of steps we need to consider?
Yeah. So look at and this happens, I'd say on most farms, that you end up with a lamb that you thought was sucking, or something goes wrong, and then in the morning time you come out and here we have a lamb now, and the lamb is down. At this stage the lamb isn't able to stand, and really, I suppose what happens in a lot of farms is we end up tubing that lamb with milk, and very often that does for the lamb, because they're just at that level of hypothermia where they can't basically break down that milk into energy to keep going. So really what we need for these hypothermic lambs is we need glucose. So a source of glucose, again, this is something that has to be on farm. This is generally something that arises first thing in the morning when we go to the shed and we find a lamb, or out in the field and we find a lamb and he's on death's door. So we need to have the glucose there. We need a bit of hot water as well, and we need a syringe and a sterile needle to be able to inject that into the lamb's belly. So look at there's a number of stages of hypothermia. Right, so generally we say a lamb under 6 hours of age, so that's a relatively newborn lamb. So that's a lamb that's less than 6 hours of age. That lamb will have enough should have enough fat reserves. So if that lamb is hypothermic, it's generally, stomach tube and heating, and we're often we get going. Where it becomes more complicated is a lamb over 6 hours, and that's the most cases what we're going to be finding is a lamb that's over 6 hours of age, can't stand, can't lift its head. And in that situation, that lamb is severely hypothermic. And what we need, the only thing that is going to save that lamb is going to be a glucose injection into the belly. Okay. So it's very simple to do. And look at everybody has a phone generally, with the internet on it. You can Google this in 2 minutes in the lambing shed. 40 grams of glucose powder, so the ordinary glucose powder that you get in the health food shop, 100 mils of boiled water, so that's half a cupful of boiled water. Mix the two of them, and then it's 10 mls per kg, so you leave it cool down to body temperature, and you inject about 10 mils of that solution per kilogram of lamb live weight. So generally we'd be talking about a 5 kilo lamb, so you'd be given 50 mils of that solution into the belly. So that's an inch out from the belly button. We go an inch out from the navel, and an inch down from the navel. So that's roughly the thickness of your thumb. And you inject at a 45-degree angle, aiming for the base of the tail, where the tail meets the rump of the lamb. That's where you're aiming for. Pull back a small little bit on the syringe just to make sure we don't have blood or urine. Highly unlikely that that's going to happen. If it did happen, you withdraw the syringe and you start again, discard the contents, and you start with a new. If when you pull back on the plunger, you don't have blood or urine, which will happen in most cases, you just have nothing coming into the syringe, you inject the solution into the lamb's belly. That's an immediately available source of energy. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep the lamb alive until you can get the body temperature up. So we inject the lamb with the glucose into the belly, basically then heat up the lamb to body temperature. And once we heat up that lamb to body temperature, then you can go and stomach tube it and feed it and give it a heat lamp and all those things to make sure it survives after that. But it is a miraculous type treatment actually when it works well. And a lot of farmers who've tried it are it's great in terms of seeing this lamb that was literally on death's door, and an hour later it's standing up inside the warming box, walking around, and you'll save a lot of lambs with that. So having the glucose there for people that are out lambing outside or have young lambs outdoors and have nowhere to bring them in, even making that glucose solution up in a flask when they're going out in the morning to check the sheep, and having it available to immediately inject the lamb if they find one down in the field. And then obviously they need to heat up that lamb as quickly as possible, bring it back to the yard and get it into a warming box or some system to get the body temperature back up to normal as quickly as possible.
To be fair, Michael, I think the biggest hang up on that is actually doing for the very first time. Like, you're literally just picking that lamb up, holding by the front legs, and the lamb is foundered unless we actually do something with him. So it's a case of getting on, and as you indicated there are plenty of clips on YouTube showing you how to do it. So it's a great tool to have. You also mentioned lambs outdoors. Some will have lambed a bit earlier. It's still applicable for that young lamb up to 2-3 weeks of age.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So look, this is basically dealing with hypothermia, and we would have seen that last year during some of the real bad storms there in April, where we had huge wind and rain, and in some farms where lambs were hadn't a lot of shelter, and lambs were lost. And when those lambs were sent to the lab, they were coming back with empty bellies, like nothing had killed those lambs except hunger and hypothermia. So this is something that we see regularly during periods of adverse weather, and it's very important when we have adverse weather that people, if there are stock outside, that they're herded first light in the morning. Go out and check them, and then at least it gives you a chance to deal with those type of situations if you come across those lambs and they're still alive, and you can save a lot of lambs in those situations just by having that simple glucose injection. And as you said, if you do nothing, the lamb is definitely dead. If you stomach tube the lamb with milk, the lamb is also going to die, because it's not going to be able to get the energy out of to break down that milk. So farmers have nothing to lose by going and injecting the glucose into these hypothermic lamb, and they have everything to gain.
No, I think it's definitely a technique worth trying. Look, The other aspect we have to consider is the ewes, supplementing them. Current conditions, Michael, it does put an extra challenge on stock. I suppose it depends relative to where they are, relative to lambing, but what do they need to consider there?
Yeah, so look at I suppose it depends on where they are and where you're at. If the ewes are on grass at the moment, most of the grass down around the south of the country is covered in snow, so they obviously need forage. So these are ewes that are maybe mid-pregnancy, not at the stage of meal feeding, and then we need to get roughage out to them. So that's either hay or silage, and okay, in some cases it might be difficult to get to them. If ewes are on meal, then obviously it's probably a little bit easier to feed meal and a little bit extra meal than it is to get silage and hay out to them. So look at if you're just looking on the various different social media platforms over the last few days, lots of people going out with quad trailers full of silage and spreading it out in fields and heaps, for the ewes to stand around and eat it, or hay, where these fields aren't accessible by tractor traffic at the moment due to ground conditions or whatever. So look, those are the options. In compacted snow, I mean, basically driving the quad or some vehicle along and compacting the snow and then putting meal on top of that. That works quite well in terms of being able to feed sheep outside. So look at those are the different kind of options. But I suppose the main thing there is to feed the sheep. Whatever system you have of getting something into them, if they don't have access to food, they need to get some sort of supplementary. Obviously, your own safety needs to come into play first. If there's an area that you can't get to, then there's no point in endangering yourself trying to get there to feed the sheep. But where we can get to the sheep, and we should be supplying some sort of forage. And we would see occasionally in areas, where we have snow and maybe where there's plants like rhododendron and things like that sheep normally wouldn't eat. And if there's prolonged snow there, you could get sheep starting to eat plants that they normally won't eat, and adverse impacts on that, poisoning and things like that. So really important, I suppose, if you're in one of those areas, and most farmers will be well aware of that, get out there with some sort of alternative type of forage. Yeah.
In the most risky scenario there, and I'm thinking back to your glucose story with the lambs, your big risk factor, if you were far enough on in pregnancy, maybe like twin lamb disease, stuff like that, having supplies on hand to deal with that as well at the moment, Michael, will be important.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at and I suppose in a lot of cases where ewes are on, it's probably easier to feed meal maybe sometimes than it is to get the roughage out to them. And if ewes are in late pregnancy or coming close, maybe even feeding a little bit more just to give them a little bit more energy to combat the temperature and things like that.
Look, challenging times at the moment, I suppose you have to be very conscious, and both you touch on it, our own safety first, and it's also probably time to check in on those around us.
I heard this morning that on Post are doing some calls there, I think, to in some remote areas, checking on elderly people, see do they need supplies and medicines and things like that, where they might be running out. And look, I think it's the same for farmers in the community. Lots of farmers have four-wheel drives and tractors, and maybe might be able to get to shops and places where maybe other neighbours are willing to venture out, and to check on them and offer a bit of assistance if needed. And look, at the same thing applies, I suppose, in terms of supplies. Maybe some of the co-op shops and areas are vets, and some areas are closed at this stage because they're just inaccessible. And if you need some supplies, maybe, or if your neighbours need some supplies in terms of red lamps, if you spare a red lamp or something like that, then maybe also touching base with people like that.
Always be able to give a hand out, or don't be afraid to ask for help. Either is important. Gentlemen, look, appreciate you coming on. Thanks very much for that quick update today, and hopefully we'll have better weather come next week.
Thanks,
okay,
Kieran.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this episode. I'd like to thank both Damian and Michael for coming on with us. For updates summer sheep programme, if you can keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.